Hey everybody, welcome back to the GameSmith, where today we're going to take our basic rocky terrain from last episode and turn it into a more advanced version. Our build starts just the same as it did in our previous video. We've chosen our piece of bark and base coated it with a black spray paint. You'll notice here that there's a deep gouge at the side of the bark. As a result, this won't sit flat on a play surface. To fix this, we're going to want to put a base of some kind so that the piece will actually sit flat. This is just a regular sheet of cardboard that I'll draw a rough perimeter around in order to fit the shape of the rock that I'm going to glue to it. Leave enough space around the edge to add aggregate of some kind so that it looks like our rocky terrain has been suffering from erosion over time. Cut the base to shape. It doesn't need to be precise, but you'll want to make sure that you leave enough space for your aggregate, and you're also going to want to round your edges. Because the cardboard is not very durable, I want to reinforce it with some packing tape. This will prevent the cardstock from curling even when the bark is glued to it or when we paint it. After we cut a general shape with the tape, fold the excess over the edge. This will help protect the edge of the build from abuse at the game table. I found it's the leading edge of the base that takes the most abuse, and a little extra tape goes a long way to extending the life of a terrain piece. We want to layer the packing tape in order to reinforce the structure of our base. Next, we want to glue our bark to the base. I'm not going to use anything fancy here. I'm just going to stick to some good old-fashioned PVA glue in order to attach the two together. Make sure the glue that you use will hold the two surfaces together. Apply the glue to the high points at the bottom of our bark so that we're sure when we press it down it will actually attach to the cardboard. Make sure to wait for the glue to dry, depending on the type of glue that you use, before you move on to the next step. Now that our base is securely attached, we want to fill in these large gaps at the base of the bark. To do that, I'm going to use this bathroom and kitchen caulking. This product is inexpensive and really easy to use. I could use a glue gun for this step, but I find that hot glue hardens much too quickly. As a result, I can't get the aggregate pressed into the build very efficiently. The caulking, on the other hand, stays soft and malleable for quite some time, so I can add my talus or scree as I see fit. Now, in the event you don't know, scree and talus are basically the same thing. They're just the rocks that accumulate at the base of a cliff or a mountain and create that gravelly slope effect. I already have a tube on the go, so I'll just squeeze a healthy amount onto my base and spread it around with a popsicle stick. The caulking is quite thick and will actually hold a shape that I mold into it. As a result, you can create a slope from the edge of the cardboard up to the bark in order to cover the gaps at the bottom. Next, we're going to add our aggregate to create a rock texture around our bark boulder. Then, to make sure that the caulking has a firm grip on our aggregate, press it into the caulking with a popsicle stick or some other tool. I like to use different size gravel, in this case fish tank rocks, but any type of rock will do in order to create a scree or talus-like deposit at the base of our rock. Next, make sure to cover the base right up to the edge with your talus or your scree-like material. Next, after we are sure our caulking is dry, we want to remove any loose rocks from our build. I've found that using a brush will actually help pull away any of the loose rocks, which we want to do because we don't want any of these rocks to be falling off at the table. I'll use a hobby knife to get rid of any of the rocks that have fallen into the cracks of the tree bark. Our next step is to reinforce the hold the caulking has on our aggregate by painting over them with a Mod Podge and black acrylic paint mixture. For this particular build, I want to have a mixture of about 50-50 paint to Mod Podge ratio. Then after loading our brush, using a dabbing technique, we generously apply the 50-50 mixture to the base. Make sure the paint mixture gets down into all the little nooks and crannies so all the rocks are firmly affixed. The next step is to paint our tree bark to look like an actual rock formation. Rather than painting the rocks just as we did in video 5, with a basic two-tone gray and a white highlight, we're also going to add some organic colors to our rocky terrain. The goal here is to create a vibrant and dynamic appearance that more closely resembles reality than the basic scattered terrain rock from our last video. I recommend at least 3 different colors for this step. I've chosen colors that are moldy, mossy, and earthy. Also, it helps to have some water nearby. I also want to use a few different brushes for this build. A thick pointed brush and a skinny pointed brush. I want to use my thick pointed brush with the brown just in order to dab some areas where soil might collect on my build. You're not trying to create any coverage with this layer, you're just trying to create the hint of earthy tones on top of the black. When applying the brown to the actual bark, make sure that you scatter it around the surface, but don't put too much in any one area. It will help if you think of the brown as this is where dirt is collecting on the surface of your rock. Don't worry about thick layers or any patterns because all our colors will be washed out with gray tones later on. Also, because our undercoat is black, our paints will actually appear darker than they really are. If you feel some of your brown areas are not vivid enough, paint another layer on top. Now I'll clean off my brush and then switch to my other thinner brush. I'll load my brush with some green paint and apply it in a few areas around the rock. Try and avoid covering any of the brown that you've already put down, but if you end up covering some of it, don't worry. This is our mossy layer and you want to make sure that you don't put any green under the ledges out of the sunlight. Then we tidy off our brush and repeat the process, this time with orange. Now my orange paint is very thick, so I'm going to add some water to thin it out, so it'll actually be easier to apply. Then we scatter our orange around our rocky surface, making sure that we want to avoid any of the other colors that we've already put down. Because the orange is brighter than the green and brown, it will be much easier to see on the final piece. As a result, we want to use the orange color the least. Don't forget to tidy up your brushes when you're finished using them. You'll extend the life of your tools if you take care of them. Next, we want our bark to actually look like stone, so we'll add our gray colors darkest to lightest. We load our brush and start dabbing at our build with the dark gray. Don't try and get color into the nooks and crannies. If they remain black, they will appear as deep cracks in the stone and have a shadow effect. It's important that we wait for the paint to be completely dry before moving on. You can see that our bright colors have been muted by our dark gray layer. If you feel the colors are still too bright, you can always add another gray layer on top. Next, we repeat the process with our light gray. We dab our brush over the rock without trying to completely cover any of the underlying colors. Now we are moving on to our dry brushing, and I'm going to switch brushes again. I've used this brush too many times for this build, and it's really wet. I want to use a completely dry brush, and one that has a broad painting edge. For dry brushing, we load very little paint into our brush, and remove the excess so that there's very little left on our bristles. We then drag our brush over our highest surface features on our rock, paying attention to the edges of our textured surface. For a detailed explanation of dry brushing, check out my foundations video, and I'll put a link to that in the top right corner for you. Make sure to avoid getting your brush in the cracks or under the ledges so you don't spoil the shadow effect. Although this is table ready right now, I think I'm going to actually go one step further. I'm going to add some Army Painter Swamp Tufts. There are many products like this available online and in hobby stores. I really like this because it can really enhance the appearance of any terrain piece that you're building, and they're not terribly expensive. I'm choosing this tuft because I really like the color. I'm going to attach my tufts to the rock with some simple PVA glue and a paintbrush. I'll just pick a few random spots and apply the glue, and then with some tweezers I'll put the tuft on top and press down to make sure that it's secure. You don't want to place too many tufts on your build. In this particular case, I think the philosophy less is more works best. Now that everything is dry, you can see the details on the bark are highlighted to really capture the stone-like appearance, and the bright colors also enhance the sense of realism. The dark shadows in the cracks and the talus around the base preserve a sense of weight and the impermanence of nature. And now that all of this is done, I think this piece is ready for the table. This was a more advanced version of creating rocky scatter terrain out of tree bark. I hope there were a few things in this video that were helpful, and if you want to see more of what we're doing here at the GameSmith, please hit that thumbs up button to keep the gladiators off my back. If you can suggest any products like the tufts of grass that would enhance this build, I'd sure like to hear from you in the comment section down below. And an FYI to all of the brave souls who stayed around till the end, our next video is going to be on scatter terrain statues. Until next time, I'll see you at the table!